taken in Brussels. They're also, of course, as you know, dictating the terms on which the Greek economy is run and the Italian economy. Greece now has 35% of its population living in absolute poverty. And they're also, and people forget about this stuff now, because in the debate about Brexit in the UK, it's all become so focused on the quarrel between the Remainers and the Leavers that people forget what the initial object of our objections was. They forget how Brussels runs things, and it promulgates streams of ill-considered, one-size-fits-all legislation that is sometimes expressly designed at the behest of powerful lobby groups in the EU to stifle innovation. Now, some of you may have heard of the Dyson vacuum cleaner. Have you heard of a Dyson vacuum cleaner? Do they sell them over here? I'm getting some vague nods of, yeah, I think there's some vacuum cleaner users over there. And now the point about a Dyson vacuum cleaner is it has no bag. That was the breakthrough. It has no bag. It's a cyclonic device. And it scandalized other EU manufacturers, and they saw a threat to their market share. And they persuaded, principally Siemens and Bosch and Miele and Bosch, and they persuaded the Commission to ban it, or that particular model, on the grounds that it used too much power and had too much suctive force. It sucked too hard. Now, look, I'm sure you're all in this conclave expert wielders on of the vacuum cleaner, as I say, and I'm sure you know there are risks in deploying an overpowerful vacuum cleaner. You can accidentally suck your budgerigar through the bars of a cage, or do yourself or sustain some sort of serious injury in the course of vacuum cleaner abuse. But the objective of the EU's ban on the Dyson vacuum cleaner was nothing to do with the super suctive power of that device. Absolutely not. It was nothing to do with safety. It wasn't even really about energy consumption, which was the ostensible justification for their intervention. Their real objective, at the behest, as I say, of Miele and Bosch and other manufacturers, was to stifle competition and to stifle innovation. And quite frankly, the EU can ill afford to stifle competition. It is a zone of low growth by comparison with much of the rest of the world. It has high unemployment, especially high youth unemployment. The proportion of patents registered in the EU worldwide has fallen by about 10% in the last 10 years. Look at the growth industries of the future: tech, bioscience, AI. There's actually only one region that can rival Boston, Cambridge, or Silicon Valley, and that's the triangle between London and Oxford and Cambridge. And I think one of the advantages of Brexit, as we look to the future, is that in all those growth industries, the UK should be able to do things differently and do things better. And when we come to this problem of ill-thought-out regulation, the problem is not just economic, of course. It's political, in the sense that we have no democratic control over this superstate. The Euro Parliament is barely understood. No one knows the names of their Euro MP. And the sad thing was, for those who hoped that the UK could change the EU from within and reform Brussels, by 2016, the number of Brits in the Commission, the European Commission that runs the thing, had declined so steeply that we had only 3.6% of the bureaucrats, in spite of comprising 12% of the population and almost 20% of EU GDP. So that was why, when it came to that choice in 2016, we had, as the title of this conclave, I think, is, we had a hard choice. We had a hard choice. We could continue. We could continue to suck it up, as they say. We could continue like the Brussels-controlled Dyson vacuum cleaner. We could continue to suck it up and go on with a system that was becoming less and less democratic, less and less suited to the needs of the UK. We could continue to protest about plans for a Euro army or more Euro taxation, both of which are now happening, incidentally. We could go on being the naughty kid in the class, or else we could politely and respectfully choose a different future. And so when I thought about it myself, I could see two big questions that I had to answer. And I had to answer them positively. I'd say yes. If I could responsibly vote leave, we had to be sure that the EU would be all right and that Britain would be all right. And on the first point, I could see an argument that Britain actually has a duty to be an integral part of whatever is going on in Brussels, and that our friends would need us to stick up for our Anglo-Saxon way of free trade and free markets. And given the tragic history of Europe in the last 100 years, when Britain has twice had to come to the aid of our European friends, you could perhaps argue that Britain had a duty to subordinate its own democratic imperatives to the wider needs of the EU. And there should perhaps be an element of noble self-sacrifice in the decision. And after a few moments' reflection, I could see what absolute nonsense that was. We would continue, whatever happened, to be the second biggest military contributor to NATO. We would continue to have the most powerful and sophisticated security and intelligence services in Europe. We would continue to put all this at the disposal of our friends. We would no longer be in the body of the European cathedral, but we would be supportive from outside, a flying buttress, as I explained it to my friends in the European Council of Foreign Ministers. And they got it, they liked that. Actually, the French thought I was saying a flying bucket for some reason, which caused some consternation. But once they understood it and it was properly translated, they liked that idea. And when it came to making arguments for free trade or free markets, we might paradoxically be more persuasive by being outside than in, offering the EU the sobering prospect of a different model on their doorstep. And as for the other big question for me, could the UK survive outside? Well, of course, the British people were told that it was going to be an absolute disaster, and there were economists, you may even hear from them later on today, who said that if the UK was so temerarious as to vote to leave, then unemployment would rise by 500,000, and there would be an immediate recession and a punishment budget and a plague of frogs and a rain of blood, and the sheeted ghosts would quake and gibber in the streets. And that effort, which was called Project Fear, is to some extent still going on. And that was the dilemma that people faced in 2016, in the June of 2016. To stay in something that wasn't working for us, continue to be mindless votaries of this anti-democratic, over-legislating, job-destroying machine, or to have the courage to leave. And by the biggest expression of democratic will in the history of Britain, 17.4 million votes, they voted for freedom. And when the British people voted to leave, they weren't being stupid, they weren't irresponsible, they weren't bamboozled by the figures on the side of a bus. They were brave and they were right. And the world did not come to an end, and far from it. It's Germany that's now growing more slowly than the UK. Far from losing 500,000 jobs, the UK has acquired 800,000 jobs. Employment is at a record high. Unemployment is at a record low. And every time, my friends from the India Today Conclave, because I know you're all reading this stuff, you're all reading the international media, every time you read some negative story in the UK media, in some reputable liberal paper or magazine, remember the desperate confirmation bias of those who prophesied disaster, many of them still in the upper reaches of the UK government. They're like the people who said that Columbus would sail off the edge of the world, or that the human body would disintegrate if it traveled at more than 100 miles an hour, or that the millennium bug would cause planes to fall from the sky. And instead of listening to these chicken lickings, look at where the money is actually going. Like the 740 billion-pound Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, the biggest in the world, that yesterday announced it was increasing its already sizable exposure to UK companies, property and bonds on the grounds that the UK economy would be even stronger after Brexit. And that's why I think we would be so mad in the UK not to take full advantage now of Brexit and not to seize the economic freedoms that by leaving we should obtain. And I worry now that we're in danger of throwing those advantages away. And that's why now we've got to bust loose of the corsets of Brussels, we've got to cut the apron strings, and if we stay, as is proposed by the present withdrawal agreement that's before Parliament, if we stay effectively in the customs union and in the single market, or in a high state of regulatory alignment with a lot of the single market, then we'll not only be a vassal state of the EU, a satellite controlled by the tractor beam of Brussels, we will be prevented from doing a genuine free trade deal with India. And look at the current state of our trading relations. We have absurd tariffs. You have absurd tariffs, if I may be so bold as to say, on Scotch whisky. Currently running at, I think, between 113 and 150%. Brutally depriving the people of India of black label at the right price. How can you put up with it? I urge you, India today, Conclave, rise up. If you do nothing else, rise up and throw off this unnecessary burden placed on you and your merriment by your government. And we, symmetrically, I'm afraid we are not innocent. We symmetrically put tariffs on Indian apparel, Indian agricultural produce. How senseless is that? And there are many other barriers to trade. I'm delighted to see my old friend, the UK High Commissioner, Dominic Asquith, here in the he can storm the stage and complete this speech if need be. But it is true that there are plenty of other barriers to trade between our countries, whether it's in the legal profession or to multi-brand supermarkets, whatever it happens to be. There are things that we now need to sort out. And if we did that free trade deal, as now, theoretically, on the point of leaving the EU, we should be about to do, it's estimated that trade between the UK and India would soar by £2.1 billion, or 26%. And that living bridge between our countries would thrum and roar ever more actively. And it's already humming with goods and people and services and capital, whizzing backwards and forwards between the UK and India that sometimes it's impossible to tell whether something is actually Indian or British. When I last came here, I had the privilege of riding one of these amazing Royal Enfield motorbikes. I drove around, I think it was Khan Market. I don't know why I was allowed to drive around Khan Market, but it was an absolute thrill to see that place from a Royal Enfield bike. It's a British design, quite an old British design. But it's made here in India, and they now have a new technology research centre in the UK. Now, is that motorbike? Is it British? Is it Indian? Is it Brindian? What is it? Look at the JCBs that are made over here. British owned, but made in India. Look at the Jaguar Land Rovers, Indian owned, but made in the UK. We have a hybrid cuisine, and the people of Glasgow are vying for protected geographical designation as the pioneers of chicken tikka masala. We have a hybrid music, the Bhangra beat, which I think comes from either from Wolverhampton or Birmingham, depending on, I think they also vie for the honour of having, with a light bulb, motorbike dance routine that they have. We have a hybrid language. Take an everyday headline from, not from India Today, but perhaps from a UK newspaper. EU juggernaut loots cash from Blighty. You find that virtually every word comes from Hindi, doesn't it? Virtually every word. You knew about juggernaut and you knew about Blighty. But did you know that both loot and cash are Hindi? Did you know that? You did. Well, I didn't. There you go. Loot and cash are Hindi words. And so I just say to you, in conclusion, that we have so much to build on and so much to look forward to. We have so many shared concerns, not just now in the current state of heightened tension, but look at the concerns that we have in this region in the future, from the navigability of the seas to the encouragement of democracy across the Pacific. And by the way, if you want proof that Brexit is a project devoted to openness and internationalism, look at the embassies we are opening now. The UK is opening across the Asia-Pacific region. Look at the plans to deploy carriers to this area. Look at, by the way, something that I know is of importance to many of you. Look at the latest visa figures from the UK, of immigration to the UK. There were 583,000, and I know that Dominic will be particularly thrilled that I'm ending on this point. There were 583,000 visas issued to people from India to the UK last year, which is 10% up on the previous year, which was in turn 10% up on the year before that. There were more Tier 2 visas issued to Indians than to the rest of the world combined. And so don't listen just to what we say about Brexit and openness. Look at what we are doing. And I know that India is the great rising power of Asia. And I know that we Brits are now only one of your suitors, and I'm just one of the great parade of people who comes through from around the world. I'm honored, big cheeses of India today. I'm honored to have taken so much of your time. But let me just say this. When you are considering where to send your brilliant kids to university, remember that 4 of the top 10 universities in the world are in our country. The 1 in 7 of all the kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers in the world were educated in the UK, and that 1 Cambridge college has more Nobel Prizes than Russia and China combined. A fact that as Foreign Secretary I did not hesitate to point out. Though whether I said it in Russia and China, I can't remember. When you're thinking about where to make your movie, remember that London is the second biggest the biggest capital of Bollywood outside this country. And when you're thinking of investing in the UK, remember the time zone, remember the language, remember the deep historic links between our countries, the rule of law, and remember also that it rains more in Rome than it does in London. And when you're wondering about the real meaning of Brexit, and as Metternich said of Talleyrand, what did the British people mean by that when they voted leave? I am here to tell you, as one of the many authors of that movement, that we intended that we should be more open, more outward-looking, and more engaged with the world than ever before. And above all, that means being engaged with India. So thank you very much for your kind attention this morning. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris, for that very forceful presentation. But I'm not going to ask you immediately about Brexit. I'm going to ask you a personal question. When I met you yesterday, I was a bit surprised. You didn't fit the picture. The disheveled look was gone. You lost weight. What's this about this image makeover?
No. Sorry. Thank you. Now I can explain that. I can explain that very simply, Raj. We have a wonderful system in the House of Commons. There's a barber downstairs they're called Tamara and Kelly, and I just went down and Tamara said, "Do you mind if I use the shears?" And I was thinking about something completely different at the time. I said, "Go ahead, do whatever you want." And so, but the advantage of this is it will last a long time. And
it'll correct itself.
Yeah, that's right.
And the weight, you've been working on biking a lot, or what's?
Well, I'm afraid I'm still not far shy of 100 kilos. So you're very kind, but I've got a long way to go. The secret is, I do a lot of cycling, and I thoroughly recommend it. Cycling in London, by the way, is very, very safe, and I commend it.
And this is not because you're fighting a losing battle, maybe in some senses, the way Brexit is going, the way the British Parliament is rejecting every offer that Theresa May comes up with.
Well, no, I don't think I am fighting a losing battle on that front. I think there's a very big struggle going on over what Brexit really means. And if you listen carefully, and people were really listening carefully just now, I was so honored by the attention that was being paid to what I had to say. If you look at the debate, you either stay locked in the EU system, locked in the customs union and the single market, or you really come out. And at the moment, Britain is a bit, the Treasury, the whole system, they're too nervous of really taking the leap. And unless you do that, unless you become a country that's able to control its tariffs, that's able to control its regulation, you can't take advantage of Brexit. And sincerely, you might as well be in. I mean, unless you actually have the regulatory freedom to make your vacuum cleaners differently, to think about the development of bioscience and artificial intelligence and all the areas in which the UK might want to diverge in the future from Brussels. Unless you have that freedom, then, you know, stay in. I don't think that the UK is going to stay in, nor do I think the UK should stay in. There's no way. I mean, I know a lot of people ask me, are we going to walk this thing back? Are we going to...
Yes, I mean, are you going to have a second referendum? Is that on? And why not?
I don't think so. I don't think that is possible. I think that the anger in the population would be so intense. And the tedium. I mean, you know, people would be driven absolutely round the bend by the idea of having to vote on this thing again. It was a very acrimonious, a very divisive campaign. And I think you would find that a lot of people felt they'd made the decision, and I must respectfully say to all the people who want what they call a people's vote, as though, you know, the last vote was conducted by the animal kingdom or something. All the people who want a people's vote, the people are not fools. They voted leave. They want to be heard. And if we really, really consult them again, I think they will simply return the same result. What we need to do now is deliver Brexit and deliver a positive agenda, and we can.
But the clock is ticking. Would you favor no deal at all?
Well, you've got to be careful about what you mean by no deal. I don't think that the UK and the EU, which are sophisticated, mature political bodies, they're not going to split from each other in circumstances in which you suddenly have a sharpened palisade of tariffs or real barriers to trade. There's going to be some sort of standstill, some sort of period, perhaps lasting 2 or 3 years, in which you keep the existing zero tariff, zero quota arrangements, you keep the existing freedoms, but the UK legally comes out. And during that period, you negotiate a free trade agreement. That is really the best way forward. That's what a no deal should be. And in my view, that would actually be a very good solution. If we come out, but without this backstop, it's incredibly... The moment the deal keeps us effectively in the customs union and in the single market, unless the UK is willing to allow Brussels and Dublin to run Northern Ireland. And the UK is not willing to let that happen. And no UK Prime Minister will ever let that happen. So that's the dilemma at the moment.
But since you'd mentioned Ireland, there's also deep divisions in Scotland. Do you think at some point there could be the breakup of the United Kingdom, that you would just be England and you would have Scotland and Ireland? Isn't there a grave danger of that?
Well, that's fascinating, because the paradox is actually that the vote to leave the EU was followed, as you remember by the election of 2017, which didn't go brilliantly for the Conservatives, except in one place. Where? Scotland. Where suddenly, I think we won 17 seats or something like that.
They're hoping that you would reverse the decision? No.
Because no, on the contrary, no. Because the forces bringing the UK together have been, in fact, strengthened by the decision to leave. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The Scottish nationalists are running out of steam. And also, I don't think people want to see more constitutional disruption. They want to see the UK together. They're very proud of their country. And I think that that's a dog that really hasn't barked, as it were, the whole breakup of the UK. But the Northern Irish issue, that has to be sorted out.
Now, you've, in some senses, been compared to Trump for other reasons, but...
Yeah, what is all that about? Yes, I'm perplexed by that, but anyway.
One of them is that you're building a great wall of Britain, and you're obsessed by it.
Wow. I'm not, on the contrary. I mean, I really find that most bizarre. I think for many years, I was the only politician in the UK to have anything positive to say about immigration. And even when the Labour Party was coming out against it, when my party, the Conservative Party, was being very hostile to the benefits of immigration, I spoke up for immigration to our city, our capital city, and to the UK. So I don't know what all that's about. As for I'm not far from building a wall. I want to build a bridge, literally. I think we should. I think it's crazy that we're going to continue for the rest of our lives with only one fixed link across the channel. You know, these are the fifth and sixth biggest economies in the world, France and the UK, and they have one railway line between them, and they're only 20 miles apart. It's ridiculous. So there's a job for some Indian construction company one day.
But if you talk to a lot of people, and particularly when you're in England or Britain, half the people, or maybe a little less than half, seem to hate the idea, possibly hate you. Does that in some senses bother you, that you have such a deep division?
Well, look, it did become very personalized. I won't deny that, and not by me. I mean, I never attacked anybody, but it is absolutely true that there is a great deal of abusive stuff that you can read online about those who campaigned to leave. And I think that the UK establishment was very shocked by the result, and very wounded, and very angry. I think they're wrong to be like that. I think it's going to be a great success. But I forgive my tormentors. I forgive them. I love them and I forgive them. I don't mind. And I think any politician has to understand that when people shout at you and they say you Tory tosser, or whatever it is, and they say worse things, and they spit, or whatever it is, you've got to remember that it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about the ideas that they think you represent. And they have to have some way of expressing that. And by the way, symmetrically, the awful truth is that when they hail you as a hero, as they sometimes do, and they think you're wonderful, as they sometimes do, then I'm afraid it is also equally, what's the word I want? Illusory.
And do you think, you'd argued about the fact that visas have gone up to Britain, that India should be worried, that the xenophobia that you'll exhibit to Europe could also come to the subcontinent, particularly that a lot of Indians are living out there. Do we have anything to be worried about?
Well, I sincerely hope that you don't have anything to worry about. I hope that xenophobia is not the result of this. This is about democracy for me. It's about a sense of impatience with an EU economic model that I don't think works, and a desire for the UK to be able to do things differently. And I think that when it comes to the subcontinent, I think Narendra Modi was absolutely right when he said that Pakistan and India should be working together to alleviate poverty and illiteracy and to build prosperity, and not escalating tensions in the way that we've seen. And I hope that there is, you can have, the real debate in the world today is, can you have a system of national self-government that makes everybody feel included, the poorest in society as well, that makes them feel they have a stake in their government and their society, but without building ugly feelings of chauvinism or nationalism or specialness and exclusiveness towards other groups. And that's the great question. And I think you can. And I think actually the paradox is that you can reduce xenophobia and you can reduce prejudice if you give people the power to control their lives and you give people a sense that they have a say in it. And that was the problem with the way the EU was working. You increase people's sense of powerlessness when they could see huge numbers of people coming into their country, and they knew that their politicians had no control. What people want is a sense of control over their lives, and then they're actually prepared to be very welcoming and very generous.
You mentioned India and Pakistan and the tensions. We regard, and the world now regards Pakistan as the epicenter of terror and terrorism. What would you do and what would you advise your government to do to ensure that Pakistan in some senses, corrects its ways?
Well, Raj, as you know, this is a problem that bedevils all the region, and indeed it's something that really we think about a lot in the UK government. We have, as you know, we have a very important relationship with Pakistan, but there is no doubt that the deep state in Pakistan is responsible for, or has been responsible chronically for association with sponsorship of terrorist groups. That is a problem that we address through, as you know, through the Financial Action Task Force, through blacklisting, through grey listing. We put a huge amount of pressure on Pakistan. I would say, now that I'm out of office, one reflection I do have is that perhaps more could be done through we make very substantial aid contributions to Pakistan, and quite rightly. We do fantastic things educating girls in the Punjab and all that, but I think it's something like £300 million a year. We could consider putting even more pressure through our aid budget on Pakistan. I happen to think that Imran Khan, as far as I understand matters, Imran Khan behaved sensibly and prudently in deciding to release the pilot, and I think that was a good move. But he clearly faces a very, very difficult situation, and I think all of us who worry about what is going on there have got a real duty to support the civilian side of government in Pakistan against the military and the deep state elements, and to clear up what is a chronic and a very difficult problem, not just for this area, but for us in the UK as well.
You've met Prime Minister Modi. What is your impression of him? And
he's a firecracker. I mean, he came to. I formed a very, very positive impression of him. He came to London. He came to see me when I was mayor, and I have no idea why, but it was fantastic. And we went down to Tower Bridge, and he made this fantastic sort of impromptu speech outside City Hall, and then he went and had a rally in Wembley, and I knew then we were dealing with an absolute political phenomenon, because he got huge numbers of. We're being told to shut up. He got huge numbers of people to support him in Wembley. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in the election, Raj? You tell me.
That's a guess that everybody would want to take here. But I've got a final question, because I see Avantika here. Would you like to be Prime Minister of Britain?
Thankfully, there is no vacancy for that office. There is no vacancy for that office, and I would say Narendra Modi has as much chance as I have of being Prime Minister of our country, judging by his performance in Wembley. So, my job. I'm honoured that you've invited me here today. I always have a wonderful time in Delhi. All I want to do, I have a simple message to all you brilliant people at this conclave, and that is, Britain is open and outward-looking and wants to do even more with India, and that's the message, and indeed the purpose of Brexit.
And you wouldn't want to dance like Theresa May did?
No, well, I didn't. Well, I have danced to ABBA, but I've also danced at many an Indian wedding in the way that I have described, with signal lack of success. But no, look, what needs to happen is that we need to get this Brexit done properly, and our Prime Minister now needs to punch a hole through the back of that backstop. And it's got to be a hole that's big enough to fit the entire United Kingdom. And once she does that, we're free. We're at the races. We're home and hosed. And I'm hoping she'll do it.
Well, Boris,
thank you.
Let's hope your dreams come true.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for this. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, another huge round of applause for our first guest, Mr. Boris Johnson. May I please call on stage Mr. Arun Puri, who's the Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of India Today Group, to kindly come and felicitate our guest for the morning. Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson. Thank you. All the best.